Welcome everyone to Something Wicked Film Festival DocuFest. We are here with Kevin Powers today, and this panel we're talking about directing documentary films. So, Kevin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself again?
Well, okay. Kevin Powers. I'm the co-festival director and program director of the Something Wicked DocuFest. I've directed several short documentaries, most of them being behind-the-scenes documentaries, but I am in post-production on a feature-length documentary that I co-directed. And I was hoping to have it ready for this film festival, but lo and behold, time got past us. So me and my co-director, we'll have to try and get it done for next year's event.
Gotcha. So, jumping right into it, directing with documentary films. What made you want to get into documentary? What was the documentary that kind of influenced you to get into it? And what director was the one that when you did your shorts, you kind of looked to for inspiration?
Well, that's kind of a twofold kind of question. Directing documentaries is something I got into on accident. I was originally a photographer, and a lot of people wanted me to take photography of their behind the scenes for their films. And then when I was doing that, I just ended up taking video footage as well. So it started off that way. One of my earliest projects was a little web series called Diary of a Filmmaker, which was just that. Me going to film sets and shooting as much footage as I possibly could, and then editing them into like these 10-minute segments that people could watch and then link up with the actual film that it was based on. I did a lot of these back in the day, 2 seasons worth of this little show that was only seen by a handful of people, but it allowed me to get into how I would approach my own behind the scenes documentary, which is what I eventually did, and two of which you can actually watch during this event this year. I have some other ones, but those are two I wanted to put out there just because you can watch the actual films that they're based on online. So I put those out there. But I got started doing behind the scenes documentary mostly. And so I've done a lot of those. I haven't actually tested doing a non behind the scenes documentary until I did this feature film with my co-director Jennifer Osberg.
Gotcha. So how was that difference between going from something behind the scenes to going something that isn't behind the scenes is very different. And how was that for you making that jump?
Well, the film I'm talking about right now, its working title is Life of a Church, which I co-directed with Jennifer Osberg, and which has been in post-production for several years. We shot a lot of footage over the course of several days, shooting this religious subject, this church service with a bunch of behind-the-scenes footage at grave sites, at a lot of the people that she wanted to interview. It was just a ton of footage that we then put to the side for about a year and a half just to kind of put ourselves mindsets out of doing that project. And then now within the last year, trying to get our footing back into it so that we can go ahead and finish putting the whole project together and presenting a feature-length film for people to watch, because that film we actually have financing for, and a lot of people want to be able to see what the final product is with that. Directing that was more or less very different because I've never co-directed anything before. So doing a nonfiction film was very different. But because it was Jennifer's baby, I let her take the reins in regards to a lot of the interviews. Actually, all the interviews, I made her kind of do all the interviews because she knew the subjects and she knew the people and the culture that we were filming, whereas I knew all the technical aspects, all the filming, cinematography. I did all of that type of stuff. So it was different, but we wanted to work together to create a cohesive type of documentary so it didn't seem fragmented and like it was made from two different minds.
Okay.
Very different.
That is very different. So when you kind of went with those interviews, one of the main things when you do documentaries is a lot of times those interviews where you're taking someone, you send them down, and you're asking them, and it's kind of a mixture of you're asking them certain questions for the subject you're talking about, but you're also, you want to get them comfortable. So how is that directing someone like an interview? Because it's not like directing a scene where you're telling someone they're having recite lines. These are people that are basically telling whatever their story is. And how is that for you with that and in general trying to have someone talk about their story, whatever you're interviewing, and making them feel comfortable and stuff?
Well, it's kind of twofold. When I am doing my interview with series, where I'm sitting down with someone and interviewing them specifically about their life, their techniques, and everything like that, I have to get them comfortable first. So I ask them a lot of personal questions to get them comfortable with me as an viewer. That may take 5 minutes, may not take any time at all. It may take 10, 15 minutes before I get into the actual questions I want to ask them, because the more comfortable the subject is with me, the easier it is for them to tell me their story. And with the long form documentary, as opposed to an interview with series, or even my behind the scenes series, when I'm interviewing subjects all the time, I have a lot more time with the feature film and the subjects than I do with the behind the scenes stuff, where I may have 5-10 minutes here to interview the subject, as opposed to having a good hour to sit down and talk and discuss with each of the interviewed subjects of that film. And it's very, very different. I mean, I have more time to make up a lot of the questions that are not going to be in the final film. And I know they're not going to be in the final film, but it allows the interviewed subject to be able to become comfortable with me as the interviewer.
When you're doing that too, sometimes people, depending on the subject of documentary, some people seem protective. Some people are, very defensive. So how is that kind of making them feel comfortable? And when you're doing this stuff, do you have stuff prepared? Do you kind of let it go free form? And how do you deal with subjects that, the interviewer may not want to talk about? How do you go about making sure that you never make them feel uncomfortable by bringing up a subject that they're actually not okay with talking about?
Well, one of my tactics, and this isn't for everybody, is I kind of like to give my interviewed subject kind of a list of the hard questions that I want to ask them, so that if there is something they absolutely positively do not want me to ask, I won't ask it. Because the moment you lose the trust of your subject is the moment your documentary is over. That being said, unless you have an antagonistic subject matter, you should be wanting to allow your subject to get their story out. So if it takes a little time, it takes a little time. If you have to build up to those harder questions, you build up to those harder questions. As a filmmaker and as the interviewer, my job is to let them take the time they need to tell their story. In post-production, when we're editing the movie together, obviously you don't have that much time to allow that. But when you're there shooting with the person, you need to allow them the time to let their story flow naturally, because an audience member will automatically know if something was forced, or if something doesn't feel right with what they're watching in front of their face. It is tough. Until you've done a ton of interviews, you're not going to know exactly how long to take for allowing these people to open up. If it's a very tough subject, like we kind of mentioned before about like the Surviving R. Kelly, that was a very tough subject matter, and the ladies being interviewed had to reveal some really deep and dark truths that had happened, and it was hard for them. And as the interviewer, you need to be able to allow them the time to tell their story in a natural way. and that only comes with experience and time and having to do a lot of documentaries, a lot of interviews, and hopefully getting to know your subject over the course of several interviews. Because that's the other thing about shooting a longer form film, like with our Life of a Church, we shot several people several times. We asked them different questions. Sometimes we asked them the same questions we asked them for, because the second or third interview, they know us. They're much more open to telling us the stuff that we couldn't get the first interview around. With a shorter subject matter, like my two films that screen here, I didn't have that luxury. I literally had to go in and hopefully get some good information from these people in a short amount of time as quickly as possible, because you never know when they're going to be needed back on set again. It's tough. But that's part of our job as filmmakers and storytellers and documentary filmmakers, is to do our best to get the information we need for our stories. Now, that being said, I don't always go into these interviews knowing exactly what I'm going to ask. I have a list of questions, general questions that I know I want to ask, because I've done a preliminary interview with most of these people, either on the phone or in person. And so I generally know some of the questions I'm going to ask, but as we talk, as we go through the different our conversations, different subjects that we talk about, I learn about other things that I want to ask questions for, that I want answers for. And that's just a natural progression of, interviewing a person, learning their story. Each time you talk to them, they're going to reveal stuff to you that you didn't know before, and you just want to know more about it.
Gotcha. Yeah, with that too, kind of moving forward, as everyone knows, or maybe not know, you also have directed you've directed fictional stuff too. You've done many fictional stuff. So as a director that's done both, how is it doing both, and what kind of drew you to wanting to direct documentaries in the first place, and how different has that been from directing your fictional stuff?
Directing fiction is a little bit easier, only because I have a script to follow. And since I'm very good about following my script pretty damn well, I can go in easily, get what I need, get out. As opposed to documentary filmmaking, because I don't know how much footage I'm going to need. I don't know how long each interview is going to be, or if I'm going to need more interviews after I start cutting the movie. That's kind of like what happened here with my feature film, is I can picture most of the film in my head as I want it, but I'm also seeing the stuff that I need to go back and reshoot, go back and re-interview, that's stuff that I already know is missing, as opposed to, say, a fiction film where we go by a script and we've already gone through that process of what is missing, what's not missing, Documentary filmmaking can be much more fun. It's more freeing. It gives you a lot more space to experiment, to go and add an interview here, add an interview there, go to this location, go to that location that's not in a script, because generally I'm working from an outline. I have an outline of generally what I want to put in the movie, who I'm going to interview, the locations I want to go to, all that type of stuff, but not necessarily a definitive script that I need to go through. So that's a huge difference and a huge advantage of documentary filmmaking.
So with that too, like as you talk about, as a director, what kind of process you go through your head when you're figuring out a subject that you want to direct, and like you're talking about the people you want to direct, the locales you want to shoot, how is that process for you?
Unfortunately, I'm not. My background is not completely documentary filmmaking, so I don't just come up with subjects like I do with fiction. I am very much a hardcore writer first, and then a filmmaker second. So my documentary films have all benefited me because most of them have been behind the scenes documentary films. I am working on a long form interview / documentary film on a particular filmmaker who I'm not gonna say right now, because It's still in the process of being fine-tuned, but that's going to be made up of tons of different interviews and tons of different footage from a lot of different areas in order for me to get the story I want to tell. I don't have a script for it. I just generally know everything I want to put in it. And I know that when I'm done with it, it's going to be a very long form type of thing. It could be 2-3 films worth of footage, or it could be like a little small docuseries where each episode's an hour. I don't know. It's different. I have to do a lot more research with that film than I would with my fiction films. With my fiction films, generally speaking, most of it comes out of my head. I may do a little when I get to shooting it. If I get to shooting it, I do a little bit more research in regards to costumes and, of course, locations and stuff like that. But the research comes right when you're about to shoot. Whereas with my documentary work, the research comes before all that. So I know exactly where I need to go, who I need to interview, that type of thing.
Gotcha. With when you're making the documentary, what is your opinion a goal for a documentary director? Is your goal to make a documentary that's profitable, a documentary that kind of influence people, a documentary that kind of becomes something, or are you, when you for documentaries, is it kind of just wanting to just send a message, and whoever listens, cool, and whoever doesn't listen.
And this is different for every filmmaker, because every filmmaker wants to tell a specific story in hopes that there is an audience for that particular story, whether it's nonfiction or it's fiction. Whereas with me, when I'm telling a story because I think it's an important story to tell. Especially in the way that I'm telling the story. Every filmmaker has a different way of telling a story. You give everyone the same log line. You give 10 filmmakers the same log line and tell them to make a movie of it. You're gonna get 10 different movies. It's gonna be different. So when I take a documentary subject and I want to actually take the time, effort, and energy to make it into a film, it's usually because it's a story I'm really passionate about, story I want to tell. That's how my Life of a Church film came about. My co-director came up to me and said she wanted to make a film on the subject matter, and she was so passionate about it that I said, you know what, I want to help you with this. I'm passionate about the same subject, so that's what we did. In regards to my behind the scenes documentaries, it's a little different, because each one of my films paid attention to a different aspect of filmmaking. Most of the reason because I just don't think that there are a lot of behind the scenes documentaries that focus on particular aspects. There are now. There's special features on plethora of DVDs and Blu-rays have these behind the scenes on makeup. They have on costume, all that type of stuff. But when I was going to school, you didn't see these type of things. The most comprehensive behind the scenes documentary that you will have seen will have encompassed a whole bunch of different aspects, but generally focused on the director, the person who made the movie, So I gravitated towards saying several of my early documentaries were about the makeup artist. Why? Because I find makeup artists fascinating. I don't do it myself, but I sure the heck love to put a camera in front of those people, interview them, and watch them do their process. And I'm hoping that other people will enjoy it just as much as I do. I did something on stunt performers. I didn't get as much as I would have loved to because I was too busy filming the stunts instead of actually interviewing all the actual personnel themselves. But that's where my flaws come into play, and then I work on those for the next film. I realize, oh wait, I got all this great footage, but I forgot to interview all the people who were involved in the actual stunts. I realize I need to get those people as soon as I can when they're not on set. Those are the things you learn after time. As a filmmaker, as a storyteller, you realize there's certain things that you need in order to tell your story, and so that the next time you go out there, you make sure you get it. The other thing is watch a lot of documentary films. You watch a lot of documentary films, you see how the older generations put their films together, and you try and implement it for your own projects.
that actually was going to be my next question about, like, what have you progressively learned as you've been doing these documentaries that, you know, something you would say to like someone who's thinking of doing a documentary that's never done it before? What advice would you give to young documentarists?
Well, especially with that 30, 40 years ago, talking heads was very common. Interview subjects would be sitting down like we are now and discussing whatever they're discussing for a film. Talking heads is what this is called. This is something that was very common for 30, 40 years ago, but it's gone out of style. You can use these type of techniques, but you also need to augment them and add to them. What you're seeing now is a lot of films where the interviewed subjects are no longer just talking heads, but they're actually on location being interviewed. If you watch the film American Factory, which is on Netflix, you see a lot of that. You see a lot of footage that's actually in the factories and actually there's lots of the camera moving everywhere. It's going everywhere. It's getting into the story. That's going to be your biggest thing as a nonfiction filmmaker is you cannot just stand by and watch the world go by. You have to get into the world as it is rotating, as it is moving with your camera. That's the way people want to view stuff now. They don't want to view static imagery all the time. That may work for a 5-10 minute little short film. It's not going to work for a feature-length film. They want you to get in. They want you to get the hard stuff. You go on location. You get the stuff. If you have to follow your subjects around in their car. Have them have menial conversations about certain things in their car instead of it sitting in an office and you just asking them questions. You have to get in there. You have to be in there with your subject.
And how much doing fictional stuff, do you think doing fictional stuff helps you anything with doing non-fictional stuff like this? Like you talk about with you've done behind the scenes for some of your films. Does doing fictional stuff, has that at all helped you as a filmmaker non-fictional wise?
Well, yeah, especially in terms of editing and getting your story put together, it helps it tremendously. There's nothing like a fiction film, by its definition, has a set protocols. There's a format to it. It's always been there, and it will always be there. And if you understand the formula, you understand the format, you can take that format and apply it to your nonfiction film, even though your nonfiction film is nonfiction. With a fiction film, you are creating images beforehand. You have a shot list, you have storyboards, you have all that stuff at your disposal. Whereas with a nonfiction, you can't really use storyboards as much. You can't use shot lists. You have to go in there and get what you can get, however you can get it, because there are no retakes. You can't go in and say, "Oh, I sorry, the camera I just didn't like the angle. Can we redo this whole thing?" That doesn't really work in nonfiction. So you kind of use those ideals from fiction film as you're shooting a nonfiction film. And then in editing, it becomes even more apparent because you still have to you bring your story together in a way that is easily accessible to your audience. If you just throw a bunch of images that you took together, then that's what you're going to get. You're going to get some nonsensical thing that your audience will have no idea what the heck you tried to put together. Whether it be a bunch of interviews that talk about completely different subjects within a 5-minute interval, or it can be something else. That's what we call experimental filmmaking. If you want to make an experimental film, you can do whatever you want to, and then it doesn't matter what the meaning is because the meaning will be derived by the audience member. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to actually tell a story.
So I want to go a little bit what you talked about with editing and stuff. How important is editing with documented filmmaking when you, like you said before, how you don't want things to be stagnant. So, you're deciding, okay, well, why don't we follow their life a little bit? Or you seeing sometimes like, oh, well, let's film like this big drone shot, or let's do this, and then make it a part of the interview. But you want to And even with your interview, sometimes you will have an interview with someone and it will go great and you will talk for days and days and days of so much stuff. But obviously, sometimes you're going to have to cut some of that stuff out. And sometimes you have an interview and it's really short to the point and you got to be like, crap, I need to add more stuff. So how is editing, directing wise, like what do you do? How do you go about with all that?
Editing for a nonfiction film is the same as a fiction film. The only difference is you might have a whole hell of a lot more footage left over in terms of a nonfiction film. With a fiction film, you go by a script. Finitely, your footage will be dictated by how much script you have. Nonfiction, you could have 500,000, I want to say feet, but not really feet, hours of footage. And some of that, or a lot of that, will be completely useless. You may follow, say if you're making a film about an elderly couple, well, you may be following them for 10 whole days. 10 whole days times 10 hours or 24 hours a day. That's a lot of footage of following somebody, even if you're not following when they're sleeping. And trying to whittle that down to a conceivably entertaining film is a daunting process. That's why we're still in post-production on our film. We have tons of footage to go through, and there are multiple different ways in which to approach it to tell our story. Fiction film, you pretty much have everything written in your script, unless, of course, you're not using a script. I don't recommend that ever for a fiction film. But with nonfiction, you have tons more possibilities with the way in which your story can go. A lot of times you don't know how your story is going to unfold because you're just learning that as you're filming it. When you're shooting a feature or a fiction film, you already know the A, the B, the C storylines. You already know it. It's easy. You edit it so that those storylines converge and make sense to the audience. Whereas with nonfiction, you may have an A, the B, the Z, the X, the Y, the T, the R, the S. And it's really configuring those to try and figure out what are the highlights of the story you want audiences to see right off the bat versus those that you can cut completely because they don't support the story you're trying to tell. Then, of course, you have to go through and how much footage is there to support your A to T to Z story. You can have an A to T to Z story, or you can have an A to B to R story, or you can have a B to C to F story. There's multiple different possibilities with nonfiction film, and you just have to be able to go through your footage and figure out what is the best story and what of the footage is the best way to tell your story. One of the things I don't like to do is I don't like to have a complete ideal of what story I want to tell before I film, because then it closes me to the other possibilities that can happen naturally as I'm filming the movie. I don't ever want to close myself off to the other possibilities of a story as I'm filming it. I want to be open to different possibilities. If I go in with an A to B to C storyline in my head when I'm shooting a nonfiction film, then I won't be open to the A to the B to the S story, or the A to the Z to the B story. And those are the things that documentary filmmaking allows that you can't get in a fiction film necessarily. And those are the great advantages of telling a nonfiction story, because if you're open, the possibilities are endless.
Well, we'll end with one more question, kind of going off that with the endless possibilities. For a young filmmaker who wants to get into documentaries, what would you recommend what documentaries would you recommend for them to look at to help them kind of get an idea of how they should go about if they themselves think of a documentary that they want to film?
Well, there's a lot of great resources out there now. The first thing is you have to decide whether or not you want to tell a film a single feature film versus trying to tell a series. Series have become very popular nowadays. The difference being a series allows you a lot more time and resources to tell a story over a longer period of time, whereas a feature film or a short film gives you a very limited amount of time. And if you want to tell a feature film in a limited amount of time or a short film, I would suggest watching a lot of those type of films. Whereas if you want to tell something over a long period of time, then you watch some of those. There are great examples of both of them out there. I will say that the majority of it will be feature films, because that's what a lot of people did back in the days when I was going into school, my generation. There are tons of great films out there, and we're screening some of those great films at this year's film festival, so please check those out. And those films that we're screening are from multiple different generations, so you get to see a variety of different types of films and the techniques used to create the stories in those films. But what I would shy away from, unless you are particularly into this genre of film, is shy away from the, I guess you'd call it, the personal kind of YouTube, Facebook type of weird celebrity films. Stay away from the Kim Kardashian films, the Paris Hilton series. I can't remember the Paris and that whole series. Stay away from the one, or the Real Housewives, or Big Brother. Stay away from those type of films as research for your own filmmaking, because those are not what I would consider traditional film documentary filmmakers or nonfiction films. They are kind of a modern day offshoot, because they're kind of pop films. I would say stick to the older films. There are some great ones out there. March of the Penguins, Super Size Me, The Nook of the North, Louisiana Story, Paradise Lost trilogy. Disney Nature has done some tremendous nature films, as has the History Channel. Even ESPN's 30 for 30. There's some great documentaries in there about particular sports figures. Or if you really want, if you're going to go for a long form subject matter that's not a true crime, so to speak, stick with some of the Ken Burns documentaries. Ken Burns is a great storyteller, and he does a lot of photography and talking heads and narration in his films. He's a very traditional, old school filmmaker, yet his techniques are very effective.
All right. Well, on that subject, I think that's a good time point for today's panel. So Thank you everyone for watching, and again, continue to watch the documentaries we have in the festival, and come watch some of our other panels too. So thank you, Kevin, for joining us today, and hopefully everyone enjoys the festival.